So I wound up raising my hand and why are we doing this, blah, blah, blah. And then of course I wind up being president of the whole thing, which happens, as you all know, sometimes. So that's when everything changed. It began to change at Frankfurt and definitely changed in my life. So I have some pictures that I want to share with you. First of all, I'll say, just to give you a general, get your bearings. Frankfurt is, when I was a kid, it was way out in the boonies. It wasn't even annexed into Dallas until 1978. It was what was left of a tiny little farming community called Frankfurt that existed loosely from the 1850s to the early 1900s. And it was bypassed by the Cotton Belt Railroad, which eventually went to the town of Addison. And so, so gradually the tiny little town of Frankfurt just disappeared. But what was left was this old cemetery where a lot of people of regional interest, like the Coit family and other important people in North Texas, were buried. And this tiny little church that was the church for the community called Frankfurt Church. And also this area that we refer to as the Wagon Yard, which is where the covered wagons used to camp. And then there were also these open fields that we now know were native prairie that I'll talk to you more in the presentation when I have the pictures. So today it's in the middle of Dallas, North Dallas, in the middle of a neighborhood called Bent Tree North, which some of you may be familiar with. So when I give people directions to get there today, sometimes you literally have to go through this very developed area with all these houses and everything. And sometimes people say, I think Kathy must have given me the wrong directions. That then you turn off onto a street called Muirfield Drive, and you pass a big church that's not our church. Then you get into our site, and people just are amazed because that's when everything changes. And even though it's only about 11 acres, because it's so open, it's in the middle of the city and everything, but it gives you the sense of the old way that I remember North Texas, a lot of the rural part of North Texas looking like when I was a kid. So that's just to give you a little bit of a background. Now let's go into the pictures. Well, okay. Does everybody see this? So we're going to start. I want to start the story of Frankfurt by starting with the creek that runs through the property. It's a tributary of White Rock Creek, and this portion of the creek that goes through the old Frankfurt site we refer to as Hall's Branch. And the reason I'm starting with Hall's Branch is because historically in this area, well, in every area, but particularly in this area, water has always been so important. We know that hundreds and hundreds of years ago, Native Americans traveled through the Frankfurt area on was known as the Shawnee Trail, which was an old Native American trail that went back at least to the 1400s, and I think probably earlier. And they would stop and camp where there were everlasting springs. And there are a lot of everlasting springs in the Dallas area. Well, we have an everlasting springs that we refer to as Indian Springs that's on the west bank of Hall's Branch at Frankfurt. So we know, really sure that that the Native Americans would have camped there, because they would camp where there was a source of pure water. And this is another view of Indian Springs, of the Hall's Branch. This is looking up. You see if there's a little bench there that we had a Boy Scout project, and the Boy Scouts created that little bench so somebody could, if they can't actually walk down to the creek, they can sit there and enjoy it, which is very nice. This is another view. This is a view of Hall's Branch from the bridge. And this funny looking thing over here that I used to think was a rock is actually an old piece of concrete that was placed over the spring, Indian Springs that I mentioned before, probably in the 1930s or late 1920s or 1930s. This was after the town of Frankfurt was gone and they had a bad drought, and we think they capped off the springs to provide more pressure to a spring called Keller Springs to the south of us. We don't really know for sure, but some of the old timers have guessed that that's what happened. And I don't know if you can see, can you see the what? This is Indian Springs. I'll tell you a little bit more about it later, but after we discovered the prairie and we were on this mission to try to, it was really kind of a renaissance that was happening at Frankfurt. And that's when I remembered some of the old timers telling me that there was a spring there and nobody knew exactly where it was. So we investigated and found it, and we had a little ceremony where we had these guys with crowbars lifted off the concrete cap. And for about 5 minutes, nothing happened. And I was crestfallen. It was really, because I had all these historical people from the Dallas Historical Society, et cetera, there. But then after about 5 minutes, it started trickling. And it still does today. I don't think it's stopped since then. That's been about 8 years ago. It doesn't have the force that it would have had years and years ago, because there's been a lot of building around there, which has changed things, but it's still coming out and we're really excited about it. And we have people that test the water from an organization called the Stream Team. They are testing the purity of the water in all of the natural springs in Dallas, and they report that the water at Frankfurt from the Indian Springs is amazingly pure, which is why the Native Americans camped there. So this is a map just to give you an idea. I think I mentioned the Shawnee Trail, and Frankfurt was on the Shawnee Trail. The Shawnee Trail, as I say, I think people started traveling on it at least back in, we think at least it goes back to the 1400s. I think it goes back earlier than that. It loosely started down near Brownsville, and it snaked its way up through the middle of Texas. And it was on a natural raised escarpment that made it an easy way to travel. And when I say it was a trail, it wasn't exactly a path like we think of today, but it probably cut at least a mile swath across, wide. And then through the years, in the 1840s and 50s, when people in their covered wagons were coming down from the Appalachian Mountains areas of the United States down to Texas, its name changed to the Texas Trail, and eventually it was renamed Preston. So I think that it's one of the best kept historical secrets in Dallas is that Preston Road, which is arguably one of the hubs of Dallas, that it was built on it originated as an old Native American trail. But anyway, Frankfurt was on the Shawnee Trail. And this is a map of where Frankfurt is today. Frankfurt Cemetery, of course, is on our property. So here it is. This is far north Dallas, and this area is Bent Tree North. Okay, this is the earliest picture. It's not a great picture, but it's the earliest picture we have of the exterior of Frankfurt Church, probably taken in the 1920s. And I don't know if you can see over there, there's some tiny people there. So in the 1920s, when I think this picture was taken, by that time the town was gone. So most of the buildings, the little stores that had been there, the post office, those things were gone. The White Rock Masonic Lodge, which had been an important social center and had been a school, and before this church was built, it also served as church. It was already gone. So there were years when this church just kind of sat idle, but people kept coming every year because they to clean off the graves in the cemetery. It was a very practical thing. And then that kind of developed into dinners on the grounds and Decoration Day services, etc. So in a way, taking care of the cemetery, in a way, strangely enough, it kept the little community of Frankfurt alive, even after it was really technically not there anymore. So, as I said, I went on the cemetery board, Frankfurt Cemetery Association, in 2008. And one of the first, shortly after I went on the board, our board decided to restore the old church. It had been vacant. There had been another church that had rented space from us for 40 years, and they had just left the church. So it was vacant. It was a good time, and we were very fortunate to have enough money to do it. And we knew how important it was, and we just embarked on this. We hired an architecture firm in Dallas called Architexas that some of you may be familiar with. They specialize in working on historic buildings, because with the best of intentions, you can make mistakes when you're restoring an historic building, and we didn't want to make any missteps. And that, in retrospect, was one of the best decisions we made. So this is a picture, obviously, of the church being restored. This is a picture of some of we moved some stones in front of the church to divert water. We had a landscape architect who was concerned that we would want to be sure that the foundation was protected from water standing there. So she created these are limestone blocks that we already had on another part of the property. And the project lasted 9 months. We started in September of 2009 and completed it in May of 2010. That's me watering in some of our landscape material. This would have been spring of 2010. This is the landscape coming together. We hired a landscape architect named Rosa Finsley. She specializes in native plants, and she was just wonderful, because we wanted to put in all of our landscape, we wanted it to be native, because we thought that would be appropriate. So all of these were native plants that she put in. This tree is Texas redbud. It's the variety that is actually the variety for Texas. These little plants here are called coralberry, which grow in creek areas in the Dallas area. Okay, and this right here, this is me. This is where my life changed. this lady, Rosa Fensley, that I mentioned, who was the landscape architect that we hired to put in the little landscape around the church, the first day she came to interview for the job, she was immediately out in our fields between the cemetery and the church. It kind of puzzled me because I thought we were just going to talk about the landscape around the church. But she had a hunch that very first day that she came to Frankfurt. It was a very hot day in August in 2009. She had a hunch that these approximately 2.5 acre fields between the church and the cemetery might be native prairie, because she could see some unusual plants, some native plants that you don't normally see around here anymore. But we were still mowing this area. And so anyway, after we completed the restoration of the church, Rosa came to me and she said, what do you think about just experimenting, just picking a couple of areas of our fields and just stopping the mowing just to see what might come up? And I was open to that idea. Well, so we started doing that, and it was amazing. We picked a small section, and within a short order, we had all these amazing native plants that came up. We had a problem though. We had a lot of exotics or non-natives that had come in on the wheels of the mowers when we were still mowing. And Rosa said that if we didn't get those out, it wasn't going to be a good project. Well, I was determined it was going to be a successful project. So I found myself in the middle of our meadows for 3 years, every Friday and Saturday. During the growing season, I, with 2 helpers, pulled all the exotics. And we hand pulled because we didn't want to use chemicals. And it was really, even though it was very tedious, it was really the best way for us to do it. And fortunately, I mean, if it had been thousands of acres or even hundreds of acres, obviously we couldn't have done it. But it was such a small area that it was doable. Even though it was hard, it was doable. So, okay, this bluish green grass, we started this project of working on the prairie in late May of 2010. And about maybe a month after that, late June, I started seeing this plant that I hadn't seen before. And I called Rosa with my cell phone and was in the middle of the prairie and tried to describe it to her. And she said, I'm not sure what you're describing, but don't pull it, and until I get there. And anyway, so, and this is what it was. So it was about 2 weeks after I called Rosa that she was finally able to get there. And it was a Sunday afternoon and the sun was setting, and we went out there. At that time, this plant had sent up its seed stalks, and it had the turkey foot. It was big blue stem. There were 4 main grasses of the tall grass prairie that swept all the way from Mexico all the way up to Canada in the middle of the United States. And big blue stem, I like to call it the king of those grasses. It sometimes grew as tall as 8 feet tall. To have it indigenous to your site in the middle of an urban area nowadays is almost unheard of. And when Rosa saw it, she just gasped, because at that moment we knew that what we had was the real deal. And it wasn't a prairie that we were restoring. And, a lot of people around here, and I'm not knocking those projects, they're wonderful, but what we had was a real prairie. We finally realized that it had never been plowed, and there are a whole bunch of reasons that happened, but it had never been plowed. We mowed it, but underneath the ground, the roots of these, I call them the ancient plants, they were still there. So it was almost like it was a lost world that was coming back to life again. But this is the big blue stem. And This is another map. This is the Blackland Prairie. The Blackland Prairie, which is kind of a wedge-shaped, pie-shaped section that starts down maybe San Antonio and goes all the way up through parts of East Texas. It's a smaller ecosystem within the larger ecosystem of the tallgrass prairie. And the Blackland Prairie, many times you find it tucked between creeks. Of course, we have a creek on the property. It was years ago, before everything was plowed up, back in the 1840s, there were some people from some botanists from Europe who came through this part of the country, and they were just amazed. This is before the prairie was gone, and they called it, they really thought they compared it with parts of Italy, if you can imagine. It was really beautiful, just lush with grasses and flowers in the spring, and just absolutely wonderful. This is another picture this is the blue stem, looking through the blue stem at the church. I think I took this picture with my cell phone, but I love it because it shows, all of this is the big blue stem, looking through the big blue stem at the old church. This was probably taken maybe in 2012 or 13, in the early years of our restoration. Indian Springs, which I mentioned, we had a Boy Scout project where the guys made a little path that leads you down to see the springs. And this is an old piece of boat arc that we had, and that we made the Indian Springs sign from. This is the bench that I mentioned that some Boy Scouts made, so that if you want to see the spring and see the creek, you can sit on the bench and don't have to walk down into it. You can sit here and enjoy it, which is very nice. This is another picture. Rosa created, these are old pieces of boat arc that we laid there to divide the little path going down. So the creek is down here. Here's the bench. So you walk down this way. This is one of my favorite grasses at Frankfurt. It's a silver blue stem. I love it because when the sun is setting, it really looks like little jewels. It's just, I think it's really gorgeous. That's some more of the silver blue stem. And this is our windmill on the property, which I love. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the windmill in a minute. But this is Engelmann Daisy, which blooms in May. And at one time, Engelmann Daisy was considered for the state flower of Texas because it's so prolific. I think it grows in almost every county in the entire state of Texas, which is amazing. But eventually the bluebonnet, because it's so spectacular, won out. The windmill on our site is not as old as some areas. It only goes back to 1952, but I'm really excited. This ever since COVID, I've been trying to do little projects at Frankfurt that, because we had to shut down all of our programming, et cetera, and our tours. So one thing I did, I found a man who knows how to restore old windmills. And I'm so excited because the blades of the windmill are spinning again. And it makes you feel like the whole place has come back to life. So that's been my excitement this summer. This is Gaillardia in front of the church, which also known as Indian blanket. And we have quite a bit of Indian blanket at Frankfurt. This is the, remember the, when I was showing you the landscape that we were putting in, this is the tree, the redbud after in its maturity. It's so beautiful. Rosa picked this because it's native, but also because she thinks that the color in it is so gorgeous. And against the white of the church, it's really spectacular. And this is the coralberry that I showed you earlier when it was just in baby form. This is it, and it's very pretty. This is a close-up of the Engelmann Daisy that I think is so pretty. In general, flower season in a prairie is in the spring. You've got a botanist that comes that does our tours at Frankfurt named Rich James. He refers to the prairie as a 3-act play. So you have the first act is the flowers in the spring, and then gradually as summer comes on, you move into grass season, and that's when big blue stem and all the other grasses are predominant. There are other flowers in the summer. It's not that there aren't, but they're not as many. And then you go into your winter season where things become more dormant. This would be, I believe this is blue skullcap, which is beautiful on our site. And I think they sell blue skullcap in some of the nurseries, particularly the nurseries that that feature native plants. And it was the blue skullcap that Rosa first, one of the plants that she first saw that hot day in August when she first came to Frankfurt, that kind of gave her an idea that this could be a native prairie. This is I can't think what it's called now. Sorry about that. I'll think about it in a minute. Purple. I can't think of it now, but verbena. And they also, of course, sell this, and people have this in their yards. But this is the prairie, the native version. This is blue skullcap with 4-nerve daisy. Lots of times what you see with the flowers in a prairie, they're all kind of mingled in. They like to share the space. So you'll see one growing in, them growing in together in the same space. This is the Engelmann Daisy again. And this is just to show you how we maintain it today. The first couple of years after we discovered the prairie, we did not, we didn't mow it. I mean, we didn't mow it down at all. And I was afraid to, but then we realized that it was important to clear it off occasionally, because the way the Native Americans took care of a prairie is to burn it. Obviously, we can't burn in the middle of a neighborhood in North Dallas. So we couldn't do that, and we don't have any buffalo anymore. The buffalo took care of it too. So once a year in late December or early January, we have a guy come with a tractor and we mow it down just that one time. And it clears off the woody plants, and it just, we leave a lot of the stuff on the prairie to go back into act as fertilizer. But that's the only time that we mow it. And we do it when everything's dormant. That's another picture of the mower going through the prairie. And this over here to the right, you'll see that's a monument there. That's the edge of the cemetery. So the cemetery is just right over here. This is one of our Boy Scout projects. We were adding some trees to our tree line, some native trees, because we have some houses that we were trying to block the view of, and Rosa likes to say we wanted to own the view. So we were adding trees. And now when you go in, you really, for the most part, you can't see any of the houses anymore because we have these native trees there on the edge. This is some of our tours. We have 2 tours of the prairie. One usually in April. Of course, we couldn't do that this year, and one usually in October, which we probably will not be able to do this year either. But they have been wonderful, and it's the only time that we allow the public to go into the prairie, but it's always with trained volunteers. We do not, because our area is so small, we really don't allow people to go into the prairie normally because we have to protect it. But we do allow people to do that if they're part of our tour. This man right here with the blue cap who's leading the tour is Matt White. He wrote a book called Prairie Time, which I highly recommend if any of you are interested in knowing more about the Blackland Prairie and this part of the country of Texas. It's called Prairie Time by Matt White. It's a series of essays about the prairie, specifically about the Blackland Prairie and why it was so important and why it's important nowadays to save little remnants that are left. And he's become a big, when he finally learned about Frankfurt, he was so excited. And he said, you know, if I'd known about Frankfurt when I wrote the book, it would have been a whole chapter devoted to you. But we discovered the Frankford Prairie after he wrote his book. This was a tour obviously in October because by that time, this is the big blue stem. In October, it turns russet colored like this. So this is the people on the tour in the middle of the blue stem. This is Rich Janes, who is a botanist who is one of our main tour guides for the prairie, and he is wonderful. I mean, he is so knowledgeable about the plants, and people love to watch. He's so enthusiastic that you whether you're really into plants or not, you kind of feed off of his enthusiasm. But he's great in explaining to you how plants are put together, and anyway, he's wonderful. That's Rich again with a small group. This is Matt White. This is the back of my head. This is Matt White. His wife, I think, and his well, this is wife and his 4 daughters. This, I don't know if anybody knows what this is. It's milkweed, which is very important in a prairie. And we have like 3 or 4 varieties. Our prairie area is probably about 2.5 acres, maybe a little bit more, but we've had the plants cataloged, and there are about at least 250 varieties of native prairies in this small area, which is just amazing. This is the Wagon Yard that I mentioned before. This is, it's a 3-acre area west of the creek on our property, and it's where literally we call it the Wagon Yard because that's where the covered wagons camped, probably from the 1840s, 1850s, maybe through the 1890s. Sometimes there were as many as 25 wagons camped there. And of course, they camped near the spring to get pure water. These are some trees. This is along the creek in the Wagon Yard area. And Rosa planted some more of those beautiful red buds along the edge of the creek. These are some, a lot of people ask about these blocks. These were limestone blocks that a board member before I went on the board years ago had put up because some of the neighbors were backing out of their driveway onto our property. And so we tried to soften that look by putting planting some trees and other things along there. This is also the Wagon Yard. These were some trees that Rosa added that were native just to soften that area. This is another Bodark sign. As you enter the site now, this is a Bodark sign that introduces you to our little, we call it an historic nature preserve. And these are some rail beds along the edge of, this is the cemetery, of course. There's the old church. Rosa added these rail beds on the side of the edge of the cemetery, and they're all planted with perennials. So they come back every year, but we do have to maintain them. And this is Ricardo, who's been a wonderful help at Frankfurt for years now. And he's clearing off some of the plants, just doing some pruning. This was a sign that we got about 3 years into my tenure on the board, probably 2011 or so. This is the highest designation for a historic cemetery that the state of Texas, the Texas Historical Commission gives. And so we applied for it and got it. And this is Rosa that I was telling you about, the landscape architect who's helped us so much. And this is Ricardo and Javier, who've helped us so much with the prairie. And this is the interior of Frankfurt Church. The outside of the church is very much like a lot of the early little North Texas churches, but a lot of people are surprised when they see the inside because it's just so exquisite. It's just all wood. It's longleaf yellow pine that was brought in by wagon from Jefferson, Texas and East Texas. And it's just beautiful. And fortunately, we were very fortunate because a lot of these early churches have been changed. You know, they added a room or they've made some architectural changes through the years. This one really, it hadn't had any of those kinds of changes. So it just needed basically a good redo, you know. So we restained the wood. We worked on the foundation. The floors we had we sanded down and redid. This, of course, everything. People think that we've brought in new wood and new things. All the pews are original. This is original. Everything is original. The only thing that we changed a couple of things. We added lighting. I don't think it did not in the early days when it was first built. It did not have lighting because I don't think the community used it at night. So we knew we wanted to use it at night, and so we added the lights, but they're all on dimmer switches. So and everybody we worked really hard to find lights that would blend in well. The church was completed in 1897. And this is another view. This is the old organ. My claim to fame at Frankfurt before I went on the board was I was the organist on Decoration Day. So this is just another view. The organ up front. And the organ, as I say, it was original to the church. This is a picture. This is Jeff Cummings. He was the project manager for our church restoration project. He worked for Architects at that time. And this is Rosa Finsley and me. We had a wonderful article. I think it was 2011 or 12. The Dallas Morning News did a great article, and that's us in the church being interviewed for the article. This is Christmas on the Prairie. After we discovered the prairie, and then we'd uncapped the springs, and everything was kind of coming back to life at Frankfurt. We were excited. We wanted to share the church and everything with the community. So it was kind of like we had this church, but we had no congregation. So I came up with this idea. I thought, well, wouldn't it be wonderful to reach out to the community, which was mainly our neighbors, and just have a little thing called a candlelight service, and we'll call it Christmas on the Prairie. So we did it the first Sunday in December, and we did it. I thought we'd do it a couple of times and, then go on from that. But somehow it caught on, and to my amazement, I mean, it got to the point that it was standing room only. So last year, 2 years ago, we started having two, because people kept saying, on different days in December. And so it's just become a big, big deal. And it's very simple. We mainly just sing the old Christmas carols, and people just love being in that space. And of course, at the end, we turn out the lights and sing Silent Night by candlelight. This year, we're having a virtual Christmas on the Prairie, and we're going to see how that works. Because this is the 10th year since we started it, so we really didn't want to not have it. And this is one of the prettiest pictures, I think, that's been taken of, particularly at night, of the church. I think it's absolutely breathtaking. We've had wonderful photographers who have come and taken pictures of Frankfurt, and it's just been wonderful. This is one of the pictures of the wild blue hyacinths. This meadow, the East Meadow at Frankfurt, was the last meadow that we converted to prairie, that we stopped mowing and let go back to prairie. And the first spring after we stopped mowing it, I got a call from a man who had been taking pictures out there, and he said, "Have you been to Frankfurt lately?" He said, "I don't know what it is, but the meadow, the East Meadow, is covered with light blue flowers." And so these are wild blue hyacinths. Their Latin name is Camassia psiloides. And this is wild onion that grows in the spring. I think that this is some more of the hyacinths. And this is kind of an artistic view of the hyacinths from the ground up. They're several feet, just maybe 2 to 3 feet tall. And they're kind of lacy and a soft, almost lilac color. But when you get them in mass, they're really beautiful. And this is when they become really lush. They love limestone prairies, and a lot of people aren't as familiar with this flower, but there are some other areas in North Texas that have them. I was not familiar. I'd never seen them. This is a close-up of them. They start down here and they kind of go up to the top. This is when it's first beginning to bloom. This is a really good shot. I love this picture. I think it's very pretty. The wild blue hyacinths have really become our signature flower every spring, because they're just so beautiful. People come from a lot of, miles around really to see them. Okay, now we're going into a little bit of oral history. I got so excited about what was happening historically. I mean, we discovered that we still had native prairie, and we uncapped the old Indian springs. And I got to thinking, as I worked a lot at Frankfurt, wondering if there was anybody left, that whose memories reached back early enough, or who at least had heard from their parents or grandparents about the early history of Frankfurt. So we started an oral history project in late 2009, and this lady, Alida Wiley House, was our first interviewee. She was born in 1917, and the first time we interviewed her, she was maybe 93, and she was her family's historian. She had all these binders with all this amazing information. Her great-great-grandfather, Henry Cook, led a wagon train from Illinois to Collin County in 1845 at the age of 75. It was not his first wagon train, but the Cook family lived on different farms in the Frankfurt area on the other side of what's now the Tollroad. This is a replica that we built, or the superintendent on our restoration project built, of the brush arbor. When we started doing oral history, one of the people that we did oral history with remembered as a kid, when he would come to Decoration Day events, that they would construct a brush arbor to put over the food to protect it from the flies. And so he recreated this for us. It's kind of near the church. This is Lavona Massey Cudd. She was the midwife for the community of Addison, and she brought into this world over 900 babies. And she's laid to rest in Frankfurt Cemetery. And this is Lavona planting corn. This is, some of you may have heard of Coit Road that goes through Richardson, and mostly Richardson and Plano. It's named for a family called the Coit family, and this is Caddy Coit. She and her husband came to Collin County, or actually, well, I guess it was Collin County, in the 1850s. And she was an amazing woman. She was a school teacher and prolific writer. She had graduated top of her class at a small college in South Carolina. And she was just really brilliant. She read Greek and Latin and French. And anyway, they lived in the little community of Renner that I know you all are familiar with. And I won't tell you their whole story. It's an incredible story. But she, as I say, she was a prolific writer, and she left behind these wonderful letters and diaries. And she writes in her diaries of the beauty of the prairie, and how she would wake up in the morning and look out, and there would be a blanket of flowers across the prairie. And so I like to think now that when we were bringing back the prairie at Frankfurt, we were bringing it back in part to Caddy, who is laid to rest in Frankfurt Cemetery. And this is Caddy. This was Caddy as a little girl. This is Caddy Coit, the way she would have looked when she lived near Frankfurt in Renner. This is the Coit home. So after we restored the church and the prairie was growing again and we uncapped the spring, this is when I really got more interested in trying to rediscover and reclaim our history. This is just one of the old monuments in Frankfurt Cemetery. This is Lionel Simpson, who came from Yorkshire, England in the 1850s. He was 25 years old, and he was a Peters colonist, which Peters Colony was an early settlement in North Texas. And this is Frankfurt Church. This was after we discovered the prairie and started letting it grow again. And this is a quote, of course, here's the hyacinths again. This quote has become, we use this on our website. I think it's very appropriate on Frankfurt. And oddly enough, when Ventry North was developed, the street that leads you into Frankfurt is called Muirfield. Of course, John Muir, the naturalist, and I think that's very appropriate. I don't know that they intended that. I don't think they did at the time, but I think it's very appropriate. So everybody needs beauty as well as bread, places to play in and pray in, where nature may heal and give strength to the body and soul. And that's what we're trying to do with Frankfurt. We think it's very special to have this in the middle of the city of Dallas, to have a little respite, a little place where you can go and see what this part of North Texas really looked like years ago. And this, if anybody is interested someday in coming to Frankfurt, I think Edward mentioned, but we're not obviously having large groups right now, but I think we might entertain having some smaller groups. Obviously, we have to be very safe. But if somebody wants to come, these are the directions. And this shows you, it's literally, here's the old Frankfurt Church, cemeteries over here. And all of this is Bentry North. So this is the toll road. And these are some very clear, pretty clear directions. So. Okay.
So shall we give a hand to Kathy?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. That was great.
Really good. Some other questions?
Yes, very good. Thank you.
Yes, yes, very.
Used
Let's
to
do
doing-
her hand again, because I don't think she heard it.
Okay,
Ready?
On you.
you have to unmute first.
Used to giving presentations where people are asking me questions as I'm going along. So it was that was a little different for me. So I hope it was self-explanatory.
Oh, yeah.
Hey,
Kathy?
Yes.
Hey, Kathy? So wiggle your mouse, take it to the top, and do the stop share now, please.
Stop share.
She'll bring it back.
Yes.
All right, thanks.
We're all getting so techie.
Well, and I have to thank Edward. I have my little cheat sheet here that he helped me put together. But I thought I did relatively well.
You did great.
You did
You
great.
did a great job, Kathy.
Awesome,
Thank
awesome.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
So if there are any questions, does anybody have any questions?
So
I'd like to go. Where can we go?
Well,
Thank you so much. This was a wonderful presentation.
yeah, I'm
Sure.
there quite a bit. Yeah, ever since COVID hit, I thought I knew it was important to keep Frankfurt up, you know.
Mhm.
So I've been working on little projects, and I'm either here at my house or I'm at Frankfurt. Always safe, because many times I'm there by myself, you know. So, but no, I would love for people to come, you know, groups of 2 or 3 or even more. I mean, obviously we have to think carefully about how we do it, but
is it open every day?
we don't have staff there. It's locked normally, but our custodian, he's actually the custodian for our big neighboring church next door also, he's there quite a bit. And sometimes if somebody wants to take a peek inside, they call me, and if I can't make it, Mel, the custodian, can let them in. But I'm there quite a bit. And
I live very close by.
oh, you do?
I live on Keller Springs.
Oh, you do? So you know, yes.
I didn't know.
Well,
No idea.
funny thing is, there are a lot of people. Bentry North is actually very, very large, and there's some people who've lived in Bentry North and another part of it
Mhm.
years and not known it was there.
Huh.
But obviously the people that live, you know, near there, they use it as their, sometimes they call it their central park. And we allow them to. Of course, when we discovered the prairie, we had to ask them not to go on those areas anymore. And that was a whole big learning curve, but they love it. And I think they realize that it adds to their quality of life.
I hope someone had recorded that. It'd be great to have it on our site to access in the future.
Oh, yeah.
Visitors.
Did you record it? Yeah, Edward recorded it.
I didn't hear that. What?
Edward recorded it.
Well, could put it up there where we can access it with link to it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know he was doing that. Okay.
Kathy, on your directions, what comes after right on Muirfield Drive? I was writing them down.
When you
Screen print of it.
when you turn right on Muirfield Drive,
Right.
there'll be a big stone Anglican church on your left. That's not us. You'll keep going straight and you'll see the prairie area and the cemetery off in front of you. Then you'll turn into kind of a turnaround for a fire truck. And then you turn to the right and then you'll see the church. But you don't
Okay.
get to our property until you've crossed their property. Okay.
Okay, is there a parking place area there?
In front of the church, there's a asphalt area, and where we ask people to park is facing the prairie. There'll be some wooden
Okay,
things there. You can kind of see.
okay.
If you want to go,
Anybody can go without going in the church. Just go to walk through the site and walk around. You're welcome to do that. I mean, if you let me know, I'd love to meet you there, and I can give you my own special tour and let you in the church. But you don't have to. I mean, anybody can go there and not go in the church.
so Kathy, is it okay if I give your email out to people?
Sure.
Okay,
That
so
would be great.
Kathy's email is kpower@frankfordpres.org.
Put it on the website.
Yeah, and we'll put it on the website.
Mhm.
Because if you email her first, then you could maybe meet out there.
That'd be good, yeah.
Mhm.
Love that. And if you want to, create some smaller groups or whatever, however you want to do it, that would be fun.
I'll be there tomorrow. It's just 6 minutes, it says in the map.
Can other people see that?
So that's the big church.
Yeah, so that's the big one, and this is
And you just go
Muirfield.
straight.
This is
I see,
this is the Anglican church that
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then and
Oh, yeah, there it is.
I recommend, that's the area that I recommend you park. You see where those cars are?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
We don't like people to park right in front of the church because we have so many photographers who like to.
Take a picture.
sure.
And you don't want us to walk on the prairie, right?
Not unless, we really try to make that a strict rule, unless there's a tour. I mean, if I'm out there and really doing a tour, we can do that a little bit, but this is probably early spring after we've mowed in the prairie in the winter. It's just amazing how it just kind of starts greening up and
Oh, you can see the cemetery back there.
Can you walk to the cemetery through that field?
oh yeah, you could. We don't let people walk on the prairie anymore, but yes, you could. Sure.
Right to the field, that kind of field.
The field is the prairie.
Is there a path?
Is there a path to go to the cemetery? I love looking at cemeteries.
Yes. Edward, are you doing that?
Yeah,
Show them the little road that goes down to in front of the church?
that road right there.
No, in front of the church where the cars are parked. This
So
is
there's-
you see this road? It leads you down to the cemetery. this old road.
Back
Oh, so walk the road. You can walk the road to the cemetery.
Exactly. And then there's a
Okay.
road down here that takes you down to the creek and the bridge and the wagon yard.
Oh, wow.
And one of the projects I'm very excited about that I'll let you all in on, it's not exactly a secret, but I've been working on this, preparing for this for years. We're finally getting closer to working with Encore to get rid of our old power lines.
Wow.
And once we do that, I think it's just going to be amazing. So I'm very excited about that. So little by little, we just keep chipping away at things.
Congrats. You're doing a great job, Kathy. So appreciative of it.
Thank you. Well, it's fun to share. You can tell it's kind of my baby, kind of my, it sort of fell into my lap, and then I never dreamt I'd be doing what I'm doing with Frankfurt, but it's been good.
Sure.
So Kathy, did you say that
Beautiful.
okay, so that you've got the church building there, is it an actual church with a congregation and a preacher or whatever?
Not anymore. We're an historical society organization that owns it.
How do I get this background up?
I didn't
It would-
Yeah. What happened after we discovered the prairie, and we eventually decided that we would split off the church from the cemetery. So the cemetery, when I went on the board in 2008, it still owned all of the old Frankfurt site. So now we have two organizations, and I'm still president of Frankford Preservation Foundation. So we're an historical that owns the church and the prairie and the springs. And our mission is to teach North Texas history through tours and sites, tours and lectures and cultural events. Anyway, but we don't, it's not a regular church. The only church service, if you want, that we have every year is the Christmas on the Prairie, the candlelight service. And we
So Kathy,
Weddings
do you
there?
have weddings there?
we do.
That's right. Yeah.
We earn money to support our mission, by having weddings. It's not, and it's when we started out in 2014, that's when we started the Preservation Foundation, and we didn't have any money, so we thought, okay, how are we going to make money? And we looked at the church and we went, weddings.
Yeah.
And they have been, you can imagine.
Oh, beautiful.
They're just beautiful.
When I went there, Kathy, we got to go inside it, our women's group, and I went in and Kathy was playing the organ, and I asked her for Church in the Wildwood, and we all sang the Church in the Wildwood with Kathy playing the organ.
Yeah.
Good.
My mother went to TWU when it was Young Women's Christian Association or college or something, and there used to be a little chapel in the woods.
Yeah.
In Denton. And I remember her taking me up there and saying, now when you get married, I want you to get married here. But I didn't.
But it's been interesting to me. I really think that a lot of these young people are hungry for things like Frankfurt. They don't want the big fancy wedding.
No, they don't. And
ones that come to us, and they seem to really appreciate what we have,
Sure.
That's been very satisfying. But
You publicize pictures of people getting married there to publicize it?
we have that on our website,
Okay.
Frankford Preservation Foundation. There's a whole section there on that. And yeah, in fact, there's a picture of my niece. My niece was the second person to get married after we'd restored the church. She was the most beautiful bride in the world.
Of course.
We'd ever seen. Anyway, we have her picture and some others that it's been a lot of fun.
Oh, wow, what a beautiful picture. Oh, there's a picture of a wedding.
You found it? Where'd you find it?
Hold on, a picture of a wedding.
Frankford Preservation
Yeah, here's the website. And
You're on
Foundation.
we'll put together an email that has all this information, Kathy's stuff, and then we'll figure out how we can get a couple of small groups to go out there. But Frankford Preservation Foundation.org.
Yes.
We could just go in a small group and stand our 6 feet apart and look at it, you know.
Yep. So it's available.
Yeah, we can all go out there in our individual cars, or you could just go out there on your own. So
Yeah, you know, you can drive out there to go see it.
yeah.
Not what, half an hour or less.
Just don't go walking on the prairie now, okay?
Yeah.
Unless you're with Kathy. So there's the website.
Well, let's have one more hand for Kathy, and we will close.
Okay, thank you.
Very good, very good. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And thank you, Paula, for pulling this together.
Yes,
Thank you, Paula.
Yes, thank
Oh,
you.
you're welcome.
Yes.
So, and I want to ask one quick question. So what I had thought of next year, you know, I mean, we're going to be on Zoom for a while, folks. So I was thinking of doing more of these, of things that around Dallas that are really interesting. Mary Latham was saying that they've redone the Hall of State.
Oh.
And
Yeah.
maybe we could get a program from there. And I'm thinking of the Holocaust Museum, and Carolyn mentioned the zoo. So I'm thinking of having some things where we've gone on trips, but we're not going to have what we usually have with people going on trips, you know, so.
We put it out there, make people want to come to Dallas later when they can, when they see all of this.
So I'm thinking more, you know, every so often, something like this, of something cool in Dallas.
Yeah.
I took a really neat trip through one of the retirement centers. And we went up past Gainesville to an area it was in the Cross Timbers. You know, the Cross Timbers up there.
Yeah.
And this gal, her husband was with the State Department, and he had built an A-frame house, and she was a masseuse, and she was an organic gardener, and she made our lunch organically. And then she took us out to the Cross Timbers and showed us how everybody had trouble getting through. And then we went to Gainesville to the Circus Museum, Paula.
Oh,
I
thank
looked
you.
at your picture.
Y'all know I was
And
in the
took a
circus when I
tour
was
of
a kid,
Gainesville
right?
and came home. It was really nice. And actually, Rosemary Rumley was on the bus, and she took us all over Dallas. You know how she knows every structure in Dallas,
Yeah.
and it was fun. Yeah.
Because y'all know I was in the circus when I was a
Paula,
kid.
Paula, I have the flyer for next month if you'd like me to show it, if I can get on
Please
the screen.
do. Let us see it.
Can I share the screen and put it up?
Next month's meeting.
Next month's meeting, let's look at this one. Yep, there it is. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
What we're going to do next month, September 12th. So we'll send
Cornwell. Oh, good.
you some links for that. All righty.
Super.
And it's on the website, right?
It is, yes, but I'll send that flyer and the links also.
Thank you, Mary.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.
We will see you on the
Third Thursday, August 20th. Third Thursday at 3.
Tuesday.
Yeah.
Right.
Mary
And then,
Williams,
And
aren't you glad we're not in South Dakota today?
yes.
Why, what's in South Dakota?
We were in Sturgis last year.
Oh.
We were in Sturgis with all those motorcyclists.
Mary and I